Well, it's wonderful for me to be able to have a conversation with Pastor Mike Williams. Welcome, Community Bible Church, to this little recorded session with him. Mike, thank you for joining with me and having a talk about racism in our city, and I guess how we should process that as believers. We've been talking about that this past week again. 3 years ago, we talked about it, and we came back and revisited that important subject just to see what the Bible says about it and how we should think biblically about it. And so it's a privilege to have you here and to get your perspective on some of these things, which might be different than ours because you've had different experiences than we have had and a different way of approaching some of these things. Mike has been on staff here as a pastor in the Omaha area for a lot of years, going way back to when he was a student at Grace University. I suppose, Mike, in those years it was called Grace College of the Bible, wasn't it?
That's right, it sure was.
Yeah. Called Grace College of the Bible. I'm giving away your age here. So when he was a junior as a student at Grace, he became involved on the pastoral staff of Risen Sun Baptist Church. And that then last year merged with another church here in Omaha, a long-standing church called Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church. And so Mike is on staff there ministering to the people of Mount Moriah. And we're glad to have him be a part of this time together for our benefit at Community Bible Church. Mike, you've been involved in things here in the Omaha area for years and years. As a leader in the Black community and as a pastor. And as this past May 25, when George Floyd was killed by a police officer up in Minneapolis, I'm just wondering, when you heard all that and then all the events of the following couple of weeks now, how have you and your church family processed all of that? What would you kind of say to us in regard to how you have been thinking about the events of these days, not just in our own city, but even around the world?
It is an interesting time, Chuck, and thank you for allowing me to be with you today. Thank you for this opportunity just to share my thoughts and my heart, some of my experiences. I appreciate you all reaching out and just appreciate the idea that as brothers and sisters in Christ that we can have a dialogue and really think about these things together.
Good. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
so go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, we have been here before, and I do think this is a possibility of not in the end producing much progress in terms of just people being unified and people working better together. And I say that only because of you would have thought after the Margaret Stoneman Douglas high school shooting that some more would have changed. You know, and I'm concerned a little bit about this conversation of defunding the police kind of taking over the conversation. I don't think it's really about, the issue is defunding the police, you know. Okay. I think maybe structural things we can do in our budgets that could help people better, but I don't think that's the real issue. So on the one hand, I see this as something that could not produce much, but on the other hand, I do see great promise. One of the things that really excites me, and the CBC folks may want to be looking for in the opinion page of the World Herald for the next 3 weeks, and last week was the first week, but I think there'll be 3 more weeks. Preston Love will be writing articles about what we can do to go forward.
Okay, now who is that? Tell us who that is.
Preston Love is a 76-year-old graduate of the University of Nebraska, football player, Omaha native who went to Atlanta back in the day, worked for Maynard Jackson, mayor of Atlanta, worked for Andrew Young, and was a campaign chair for Jesse Jackson when Jesse ran for president. He has since come back to Omaha. He is a community activist. He and I and others do a walking through Black History tour, where for the last 2 summers we've taken teens to places like the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, which is the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was shot. We take them to Mason Temple there in Memphis, where he gave his last speech. We take them to Birmingham, Atlanta, Selma, Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. It's a week-long tour that we take kids on. So Preston is a well-known member of the community who is about positive change.
Okay. So that'll be a beneficial thing for our city to be able to read and hear his perspective on these things, huh?
And specifically on suggested changes going forth, things that can bring us together, make us more unified, and address.
I think it's interesting, Mike, that as you think about this and talk about it and share with us, you know, one of the first things you say is you're concerned. Yeah, there's great opportunity here, but do you feel like we've been here before as a society and there isn't necessarily anything really unique about this?
The one thing that is unique, I mean, there's a lot of things that are not, honestly, but the one thing that is unique is that there are more people, more determined than ever, to make a change. I mean, I think seeing the video, I don't know if you all were able to see it, but there was a memorial service for him in Minneapolis where at the end of the service, they just had people stand silently for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And just the reality of the injustice of that, I think, has made a difference in the sense that, I mean, across the world, people are responding and saying, hey, things have to change. And some of it is just, you know, people's attitudes, but there are some structural things that can change as well.
Okay. You know, I had talked to you earlier, Mike, and just kind of told you a little bit about Community Bible Church and who we are. And primarily, you know, there's not a lot of minorities that are a part of CBC's church family. And so we think probably differently than maybe you think about some of these things. That was one of the reasons I really wanted to tap into you and say, hey, what do we need to know? As you just think about what's been going on in our city and our world the last couple of weeks, what would you share with us as a brother and sister in Christ who have had different experiences than you may have had? You've told me about your own experiences or your wife's experiences of really racism and the way people might see you or look at you and they don't even know you, right? So I haven't had those experiences, okay? As a white man growing up in Omaha most of my life, I haven't had those experiences. I didn't have a mom and dad that had to sit down and have the talk with me about how to get home if a police officer, you know, were to pull me over. I mean, my mom or dad didn't ever think about having that kind of conversation with me. But a Black mom and dad would need to have that conversation because they love their kid and they want to make sure their kid makes wise choices, right? So they have that kind of conversation. So our experiences are so different. What do you think what do we need to know that we don't know that you would share with us in this moment?
Well, I would say just realize that white privilege is real. Let me just give you an example, and then I'll give you a definition. Last week, Pastor Lassiter, the senior pastor at Mount Moriah, and I met with some pastors from the Southern Baptist Convention here in Omaha, Heartland Church Network. And we mentioned white privilege, and one of the pastors said, I don't have white privilege, I grew up poor. And white privilege isn't, you know, being born with a silver spoon in your mouth and we think, you know, everybody's, you know, has wealth and that kind of thing. And I just want to share, it's more, and this is one way to define white privilege. It's a set of advantages and choices bestowed upon people solely because they are white. Generally, white people who experience such privilege, not something that, you know, is obvious. It's part of our everyday culture. It's part of the way America functions. For instance, a few weeks ago, before Mr. Floyd was killed, when COVID was in the news, mainly, you remember in Michigan, there were protests where people came and wanted the governor to reopen the state. And if you remember in those protests inside the city building where the meetings were being held, there were white men with arms, with guns, not police officers,
Right.
but white men brought semi-automatic and automatic weapons into that event. Black people wouldn't have been allowed to bring guns into, you know, they wouldn't have gotten to the door. Another example is what you mentioned with my wife. She works out kind of southwest and goes to the Walmart out in that area from time to time, and has just had negative experiences in terms of being followed by the store clerks, or maybe they're afraid she's going to steal something. So at one point they kind of sent her to a separate checkout line that was not open, and opened it up to check her out so they would be sure that she paid for what she was going to get. You know, I don't know if anybody that attends CBC has ever been followed by a store clerk to make sure they're not stealing, you know. And to be honest, there was a woman who said to my wife once that those kinds of things happen because Black people are the ones that steal, you know. And so, I mean, is that really true? You know, I think we all can be tempted to do something wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you say to the person at Community Bible Church who would say, well, I see the racism in our world. I see it happening in our city. And, you know, they recognize the, I guess, the level at which others are experiencing it, but they don't experience it themselves. And so it's not really a part of their world. And so they're almost tempted to say, well, I'm not a racist myself. This doesn't have anything to do with me. What would you say to a person who has that kind of perspective or thinking?
Well, you know, Chuck, I kind of liken it to the church member who says doing evangelism and discipleship is the pastor's responsibility. No, it's the responsibility of all of us as believers. And I think as citizens of our country and citizens of the world, especially people who understand that we're all created in God's image, that we are all valuable, that members of the church just realize, first of all, that white privilege exists, and realize that they need to be aware of wrongdoing. You know, a lot of times things don't get better because people don't require, we don't demand it to improve. But we need to just make a stand that no, we're not going to put up with, you know, people not being able to have equal access to employment, or there's a situation in sentencing guidelines that's skewed because of white privilege. If you get caught with crack cocaine, you get a certain kind of sentence. If you get caught with powder cocaine, you get a different kind of sentence. And basically, none of us should be recognize that these inequities exist throughout our society.
Hmm. Yeah. I lost you there just for a minute, Mike. I don't know if that's going to come
I
through
would
on the
say one other
recording or
thing
not.
too, and this is just something to be aware of in terms of just the idea of white privilege. And I know members of CBC, this doesn't apply to them, but the fact that it exists in American society means that they may be beneficiaries of it just because it's there. It's kind of like if the tide comes in and you're walking along the beach, you're going to get wet, right?
Yeah.
So Charles Barkley, the basketball player, right? In 2017, he did a 4-part series on American race. That's the title of this presentation. It was on TNT. And each of those episodes were very interesting, but one of them interviewed a man named Richard Spencer. At that time, he was the leader of the movement called the alt-right. And that was Steve Bannon was a part of that, at one point. And Barkley asked Spencer, "Do you believe in white privilege?" And Spencer says, "Yeah, white privilege is wonderful. I want to expand and deepen white privilege. And I don't want it to end."
Hmm.
And it's just natural as human beings, we want the best for us.
Yeah.
But there's enough to go around in this world. And we just need to make sure that, we treat people with equity.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that on Sunday, how that's our natural inclination, of course, is to think about ourselves first. But Paul in Philippians chapter 2, talks about putting the other person ahead of ourselves and not just thinking about our own interests, but the interests of others. And so many passages like that, I think, would speak to us, and inform us biblically about how to think on this subject. Do you think it's appropriate to say, Mike, that all lives matter? I mean, I know all lives do matter, right? But that's not, I guess as I think about that, that's not a very good response for us. If we're having a conversation about racism with somebody we work with or a neighbor or something, to say that all lives matter in this context seems, but while it's a truthful statement, all lives do matter, right? Black lives matter, white lives matter, blue lives matter, speaking about police officers, all lives matter. But when you hear someone say that, or when a typical Black person hears someone say that today, that all lives matter, they seem to take offense at that. And I think I have an understanding of why, but how explain that to us? Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think that's oftentimes the way we might be tempted to respond. Well, it isn't just Black lives that matter, it's all lives that matter.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chuck. All lives do matter. But I appreciate you asking that question, because it's sort of like taking the statement that Black lives matter for granted. It's like dismissing it and saying that, well, yeah, Black lives matter, but all lives matter. So why say Black lives matter? It's cheapening the point that's being made by saying Black
Yeah.
lives matter. But again, it's really about where our hearts are in understanding a difference. And it's not just, Black folks, Native Americans, Latinos. I just think across the board, we just have to be sensitive to other people because we're all created in God's
Yeah,
image. We're all
sure.
human beings.
Absolutely. And really, the church should be on the forefront of that, shouldn't they? Because we have an understanding that all people are created in God's image in a way that maybe our society doesn't.
I'm sorry, the technology
Yeah.
has
Okay.
gotten us
That's
here.
fine. I'll say it again.
Yeah.
Responding to what you said, I said that really the church then should be on the forefront of this because we have an understanding biblically that God has created all in the image of God, right? Everyone's been created in the image of God, so everyone has intrinsic value because they've been created by God. Whereas our society maybe doesn't understand that. Clearly,
right,
doesn't understand.
Right. And to be honest, in my opinion, a lot of the reason that this is as systemic and deep-rooted as it is because of economics and money. I mean, slaves first were brought here so that, the indigenous folks at the time, the Europeans that had come here could farm, they couldn't manage the Native Americans who were here because they knew the land better than the Europeans did, right? And so they brought, and throughout the process, to justify that, African Americans were demonized, just to justify that economic, resource and need. So I think we have to think deeply and realize where a lot of this has come from, and that it's not how we really think, most of us, and so we can overcome it.
Yeah. Okay. What in conclusion, Mike? What would you say to the people of Community Bible Church in terms of what they can do? I'd asked you earlier whether people from your own church have gone and been a part of the protests and things. And you had indicated that probably not most of them have.
No,
Yeah. So,
I know.
And that would be fine and appropriate, obviously, to go down and peacefully protest and support, change like this that we recognize is needed. But what can the typical believer, white or black, in our city do? What comes to your thinking? What would be your encouragement to us in terms of what action we should take?
Again, because a lot of this happens in sort of a systematic way, is I think first seeking to be more sensitive and intentional, just like we want to be intentional about evangelism and intentional about discipleship, intentional about being observant about what's going on around us. I think, honestly, we need to pay attention to who we're electing to office. We need to vet individuals who are candidates on attitudes and policies as it relates to issues relating to issues of color and access to
Mike, we lost you again. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, I still can't hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, there you now you're back. You want to just kind of recap the last 15 seconds there?
Sure. What I was saying is that we need to be able to really vet the attitudes and policies and intentions as it relates to people and all people of our elected officials. One of the things that concerned me in the meeting that happened with city and the governor and pastors and other community leaders last Monday was after the sensational thing was over and the meeting was over. I was sitting next to the governor and I just leaned over and asked him two questions. First of all, I asked him, when we say systemic racism, what do you understand that to mean? And he gave me a definition and it made sense. He understood. And then I said, so it seems to me, even though it's going to take a long time to make changes, right now we need to start making changes that get rid of these systemic structures that facilitate the division that we have because of race. And he didn't really, it was sort of a tacit, yes, I kind of understand what you're saying, but there's no commitment in his voice at all. Okay. None. And I've had conversations with the mayor, and I feel the same way.
Do you feel like in part when you have those kind of conversations with people in leadership that they either don't really understand completely what you're talking about, or they just don't know what to do to make changes? Is that a part of it?
I think honestly, it's very hard because we're talking politics, we're talking, how the resources get divided. And I think it's hard when you've been doing things a certain way for so long to make the kind of changes that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just human.
Right. It's just a daunting task, isn't it? It's very difficult to do.
It is. And we need to pray for them. I mean, it's real.
Yeah. We've kind of experienced that with COVID-19, haven't we? We've prayed more for our leaders probably during these days than we have in the past. And we need to, in terms of the decisions they make related to the issues of justice too.
Right. Because I think the governor, he's a good guy. I've had more than one conversation with him, Mayor Stothert as well. But when it comes to, widespread change, it's tough.
You mentioned the governor and the mayor, and I know for years you've been in a place where you've had connection with people in leadership in our city. But you also mentioned earlier to me that you have high regard for our police chief and think he's really doing a fine job especially when it comes to hard issues like this. And so that's, I think, good for our city and for the people of the Community Bible Church to know too, that we really have some very fine people that are seeking to act with integrity and to deal with issues that are really challenging, but to do it in a way that will bring justice to people. So what closing thoughts, Mike, at all?
Well, again, I just want to thank you for having this conversation with me. You initiated this, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the members of CBC for, receiving what we've shared together today. And again, I would just say, first of all, yes, I hold Chief Todd Schmaderer in highest regard. I think he is a quality person, and beyond that, let's just not let issues divide us. Let's remember that we're all made of one blood, amen. And we all have a responsibility to look out for one another, to be, true to the Lord, and to honor Him in our relationships with one another. Our society is way too divided. It's just too divided, and we need to work at coming together.
Yeah. Good. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with many things, and Mike, of course, is involved with CEF, and we happen to be having the CYIA camp. Not usually it's held where it isn't usually held at a local church, but today it's being held this week rather at CBC, and so it's good to see all these young people here that want to serve the Lord in that way. And I know you've played a key role in Child Evangelism Fellowship. We appreciate that. So many in our church family do as well. So, well, we want to pray, church family, for Mike and for others, key leaders in our city, especially when it comes to these issues of racial injustice, and that the Lord would direct his steps. I appreciate, Mike, at the time you've shared with us here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pastor Chuck, and
Bye-bye.
wish you all well. God bless.
Thank you.